I used to think we'd found the perfect neighborhood. Every morning started the same way. The low hum of sprinklers, a faint breeze carrying the scent of cut grass, and the soft clink of my coffee cup on the porch rail. Our dog, Max, a lazy golden retriever with more bark than bite, would sprawl out at my feet, soaking up the sun. Life was calm, predictable, and full of the small routines that made it feel like we'd finally settled down for good. We moved into the house 3 years ago. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was ours. A modest 2-story with a wraparound porch and enough backyard for weekend barbecues. The kind of place where you learned your neighbors' names without trying too hard, at least at first. There was a sense of order, which I figured came from the homeowners association. They had their rules, sure, but it felt like those were just background noise to the rhythm of everyday life. My wife Dana worked on the base. She never said much about her job, other than it involved a lot of security clearances and long hours. I always knew it was important, but she never carried herself like someone who needed to explain anything. She had a quiet kind of confidence. People naturally stepped aside when she entered a room, but she never made them feel like they had to. That calm she had measured, deliberate, settled over our home too. She kept us balanced. Our daughter was away at college, so it was just the two of us most days. Evenings were slow and easy. We'd cook together, go for walks, catch up on whatever crime drama was running too many seasons long. I did most of the lawn work, took pride in it even. Dana would joke that I treated the grass better than I treated my car. We laughed a lot. We lived simply. There was no drama, no noise. Just a comfortable kind of quiet I'd never really had before. If you had asked me then what I thought of the HOA, I would have shrugged and said they were a little uptight, but harmless. They sent out reminders about garbage bins and painted curbs. Nothing that hinted at what would come next. Back then, I still believed that people followed the rules for the same reason we did, because they were the right thing to do. The first sign something had shifted came with a notice about our trash cans. It was taped to our front door, not even folded neatly into the mailbox like usual. According to the letter, our bins had been left out too long after pickup, though I was certain I'd brought them in the same day. I didn't think much of it then. Maybe I missed the deadline by an hour. No big deal. I tossed the notice in the kitchen drawer with the coupons and forgotten grocery lists and moved on. A week later, we got another one. This time it was about the mailbox. Apparently the paint was chipping. I walked outside and stared at it for a full minute, trying to spot what they meant. There was a dime-sized patch near the base where the black had dulled slightly. Nothing anyone would notice unless they crouched down on purpose. I repainted it that same afternoon, more out of irritation than concern. Dana read the notice when she got home and raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. That was her way, she observed. I talked too much, reacted too quickly. She studied situations, filed them away for later. I could tell she was watching now, and not just the mailbox. The next notice accused us of flying an unauthorized flag. It was the small Navy flag Dana had placed beneath the American one on our porch column. It had been there since the week we moved in. No one had mentioned it before. I called the HOA to ask what exactly the issue was, and the woman on the phone told me the rules had been recently updated. When I asked to see the changes in writing, she said they were still being formalized. That's when things stopped feeling like petty complaints and started feeling like targeted harassment. We noticed HOA board members walking slowly past our house, jotting things down in little notebooks. One even took pictures. Dana spotted him through the kitchen window and said nothing, just moved quietly into the office and made a note of her own. Neighbors started avoiding us. The usual waves across driveways became tight nods or nothing at all. It felt like someone had flipped a switch and we were suddenly on the outside looking in. Dana hadn't said much yet, but I knew she felt it too. One night, as we locked up for bed, she glanced at the porch and said, almost offhandedly, that we should be ready for this to escalate. I asked what she meant. She just looked at me and said, "They're testing boundaries. Someone wants to see how far they can push." It came on a Monday morning, folded neatly in an unmarked envelope and slipped under our front door like something out of a bad movie. I found it before Dana did, just sitting there on the mat like it had been delivered by hand. No stamp, no return address, just our names typed in block letters on the front. Inside was a single page, centered text, cold and direct. According to the document, we had 72 hours to vacate the property. It cited repeated non-compliance with HOA standards and referred vaguely to bylaw infractions. There was no signature, no contact number, no official seal. Just a threat, wrapped in legal-sounding language. I read it twice before calling out for Dana. She came downstairs, took the paper from my hand, and didn't say anything at first. Her eyes moved over the text slowly. She walked into the kitchen, spread it out on the counter, and reached for her reading glasses. I watched her study it like she was examining evidence. I kept waiting for her to laugh or say it was ridiculous, but she didn't. She just kept reading. Finally, she looked up at me and asked if I had seen any legal postings taped outside, or if anyone from the county had dropped by. I hadn't. No sheriffs, no certified mail, no court paperwork, just this. She tapped the corner of the page and said, almost to herself, that whoever wrote this didn't understand procedure. The formatting was wrong. The phrasing was off. She noted the absence of statute numbers and the lack of any legal grounds for eviction. She pointed out that the HOA could issue fines or liens, sure, but they couldn't evict homeowners without court action. This wasn't just overreach. It was fiction. I could feel something shift in her then. Her posture straightened, voice calm but firmer than before. She said she needed to make a few calls, ones she hadn't had to make in years. I asked her what she meant, but she just waved me off, already walking toward the office. I heard the door click shut behind her. The rest of the day crawled. I kept looking out the window, expecting someone to show up. No one did. When Dana came out that evening, her expression was unreadable. She handed the letter back to me and told me to hold on to it. "Things are going to move quickly now," she said. I asked if we were in trouble. She shook her head once and said, "No, but they are." They arrived just after 9 the next morning, unannounced, walking straight up the driveway like they owned it. 2 men, mid-30s maybe, dressed in dark uniforms that looked close enough to police to fool someone at a glance, but they didn't move right. There was a stiffness to them, like actors trying to remember stage directions. One wore sunglasses even though it was overcast. The other kept adjusting a radio clip to his shoulder that didn't seem to be on. I opened the door before they could knock. Max barked behind me, low and steady, sensing something off. The taller one held up a badge too quickly and said they were here to execute a residential enforcement action on behalf of the Homeowners Association. His tone had the kind of authority that tried too hard, like he was reading off a script. He said we were in violation of community standards and needed to vacate the property immediately. I stared at him, trying to make sense of it. "You're here on behalf of the HOA?" I asked. "Not the city? Not the court?" The shorter one stepped forward, put his hand near what looked like a baton clipped to his belt, and told me this was my final warning. That if we didn't comply voluntarily, they'd be forced to escort us off the property. Behind them, a few neighbors had come out to their porches, pretending to check the mail or water plants. No one said a word. They just watched. Before I could answer, Dana appeared beside me. She didn't look surprised. She glanced once at each man, then asked calmly for their badge numbers. The tall one hesitated, then flipped his badge open again, quicker this time, and said it was on there. She didn't look. Instead, she asked which department they were with. The one with the baton said community enforcement. His voice cracked a little when he said it. Dana tilted her head. "So not city police?" They exchanged a look. The taller one muttered something about a cooperative agreement. Dana nodded like she understood, then said she'd need to verify a few things and would be right back. Her voice was steady, casual even, but I saw her hands were already moving, not shaking, just deliberate. She stepped back into the house and disappeared down the hallway. The 2 men shifted on their feet. The shorter one said something under his breath. I stayed in the doorway, trying to keep Max calm, pretending I wasn't terrified. 10 minutes passed. Then we heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel, not from the road, but from the access lane behind the house. The taller man turned toward the sound, squinting. A black SUV came into view, windows tinted, unmarked but purposeful. That was when the tall one reached for his radio again. This time, he didn't bother faking it. Nothing came through, no dispatch, no static, just silence. And Dana, standing behind me again, phone in hand, eyes calm. She looked at the 2 of them and said, "You're going to want to stay right where you are." The men froze at the sound of Dana's voice. Neither of them turned around right away. The taller one tightened his grip on the fake radio, like he didn't know what else to do with his hands. The shorter one looked ready to bolt, but something about Dana's tone had nailed them both to the driveway. She stepped out beside me and held her phone at her side. Her stance was relaxed, but I recognized the look on her face. It was the same one I'd seen when a drunk neighbor once lost control of a firework that landed in our yard. Calm, focused, already 6 moves ahead. She asked them again for their badge numbers. This time, they didn't answer. She told them impersonating a law enforcement officer was a federal offense. That part wasn't a warning. It was a statement of fact. They still didn't move. Behind them, the SUV had parked. 2 men in navy windbreakers stepped out, both of them armed, both with the kind of posture you can't fake. Dana finally turned to me and spoke loud enough for the neighbors to hear. She said that as the current director of security operations at the naval base, she was formally alerting federal and local law enforcement that individuals on our property were attempting to carry out an illegal impersonation under false authority. The taller man tried to interrupt, but one of the agents from the SUV was already moving. He crossed the yard in a few long strides and identified himself as part of a federal task force. He asked the 2 men to place their hands where he could see them. Neither complied. That was enough. In less than 10 seconds, both were on the ground. The taller one shouted something about a misunderstanding. The other kept asking if they could talk this out. They were cuffed and quiet by the time local police arrived. A patrol car rolled up not long after, probably called in to assist once the real authority got involved. I stood on the porch watching all of it unfold. The dog pressed against my leg. Dana didn't move. She just kept her eyes on them until they were in the back of the car. Later that night, I asked how long she had known. She said the second she read the letter. The wording, the timing, the amateur formatting. She knew it wasn't legal, but it was more than that. She knew how people like that operated. She'd seen it before, just not in our neighborhood. Not until now. The next morning started quiet, but it didn't stay that way. Dana had made a call just after dawn, and though she didn't tell me exactly what she said, I heard enough to know this wasn't over. She told someone that the men had been taken in, that they were part of something larger, and that the neighborhood might need more eyes for a few days. She didn't use any titles. She didn't drop her rank. She just spoke plainly, with the same clarity she used when giving our daughter advice or asking me to take the trash out. Around 10, 2 more black SUVs arrived, this time pulling up to the curb in full view. There were no lights, no sirens, just quiet, purposeful movement. Men and women stepped out wearing plain clothes and earpieces, their eyes scanning windows and rooftops like they were expecting resistance. They weren't from the base directly, Dana told me. These were liaisons from multiple agencies who worked with military security on cross-jurisdiction investigations. She explained it like it was routine, like this kind of coordination happened every day. Maybe it did. By late morning, marked police cruisers joined them. Not just 1 or 2, but 5. Then a van. They weren't here for us. They were here for the HOA office, which sat at the corner of the neighborhood near the pool house. People had started gathering on sidewalks, watching in pairs and small clusters, pretending to water lawns or check mail but unable to look away. Phones were out. Whispers ran through the hedges like wind. Dana stood with her arms crossed, not smug, not even particularly angry, just waiting. Then it happened. Uniformed officers entered the HOA building, and within minutes, a man was led out in cuffs. The HOA president, a sharp-looking guy in his 50s who always wore polo shirts and walked like he was late for something. He didn't argue. He looked around once, saw Dana across the street, and dropped his head. It didn't end there. More people were brought out. 2 board members. A third guy I didn't recognize but who had probably worked behind the scenes. Laptops and boxes followed. Evidence. Later, I learned they'd been part of a scheme to force out homeowners they deemed non-compliant so they could purchase the properties through shell LLCs and resell them. The fake cops were part of that plan. They'd been hired privately, given scripts and hollow threats, meant to scare families into leaving. They just picked the wrong house. Or, more accurately, the wrong wife. The investigation moved quickly after that. Within a week, federal agents had enough to begin formal proceedings. Dana stayed in contact with the lead investigator, someone she'd worked alongside during a joint training years ago. They spoke in shorthand, clipped phrases and references I only half understood, but it was clear she wasn't just providing witness statements. She was helping build the case. Turns out the eviction letter we received was one of several. At least 4 other families had been targeted, all of them recent arrivals or homeowners who had pushed back on arbitrary fees and sudden bylaw changes. The fake citations, the unexplained fines, the threatening notices, they were all part of a system designed to overwhelm and discourage. The idea was simple: make life miserable until the families gave up and sold. The deeper they dug, the worse it looked. The HOA president and a few others had ties to a real estate investment group operating under different names in nearby counties. They had formed shell companies to purchase properties that were abandoned or foreclosed after being targeted. Some of the sales had gone through without families ever realizing the full extent of what was happening. The signatures on those documents were under review now. Some might have been forged. Dana walked me through the structure like it was a briefing. She laid out who stood to gain, how the board coordinated with outside enforcement contractors, and which bylaws had been intentionally rewritten to pressure families into default. She spoke clearly, never raising her voice. It was just information to her, steps in a puzzle she had already solved. The most chilling part was how quietly it had all happened. No breaking windows, no loud threats, just paper, pressure, and patience. They had counted on fear doing the heavy lifting. Most people don't know the law well enough to push back when something official-looking shows up on their doorstep. They assume authority. They assume it's real. Dana never did. In the weeks that followed, the HOA was dissolved. A legal receiver was appointed to oversee the neighborhood's affairs until a new board could be established. The president and his associates were indicted on charges ranging from mail fraud to impersonating federal officers. Civil suits were already piling up. Our neighbors, the ones who had stayed silent before, started speaking to us again. Some apologized. Others just nodded from across the street, unsure of what to say. I didn't blame them. It's hard to admit you look the other way when something ugly was happening right next door. It didn't take long for the mood of the neighborhood to shift. In the days after the arrests, everything felt quieter, but not in a peaceful way. Lawns still got mowed, mail still arrived, dogs still barked at passing joggers, but the rhythm was off. People kept their voices low. Conversations trailed off when others walked by. Everyone had questions, but few were brave enough to ask them out loud. Some neighbors came by with carefully worded apologies. They said things like, "We didn't know it was that serious," or, "We thought you were just having a dispute." A few brought over pies or cards, awkward tokens to soften their guilt. I accepted them. I didn't see the point in holding a grudge. Dana never commented on it either way. She'd smile politely, thank them, then go back to whatever she was doing. She didn't need the apologies. She hadn't expected them. Other families packed up and left within the month. Moving trucks showed up early in the morning and were gone by sunset. It wasn't always clear if they were tied to the old board or just scared of what might come next. Rumors swirled, but no one wanted to confirm anything. The neighborhood Facebook page, once filled with garage sale ads and lost cat posts, turned into a ghost town. A few houses sat vacant for a while. Grass grew a little taller, flyers collected at front doors. Then slowly, people started coming back outside. A few new families moved in. Some neighbors began chatting again over fences. There was still tension, but it was softer now, worn down by time, and the sheer effort it took to maintain fear. Dana met with the temporary receiver and helped draft the framework for a new neighborhood committee. This time, it would have oversight, clear bylaws, transparent voting, and an open forum for residents. She didn't volunteer to lead it, just offered advice and stepped back. She said people needed to rebuild it themselves. That way, it would last longer. I noticed people looking at her differently after that, not with suspicion or fear, but with something closer to respect. Not loud or flashy, just a quiet recognition of what she had done. Not everyone could have stood their ground like she did. Most wouldn't have known where to begin. The funny thing is, Dana never changed through any of it. She just kept doing what she always had, paying attention, asking the right questions, and making sure we stayed safe. I've always known Dana was the strongest person in the room, But it took this whole mess for me to realize how different her strength really is. It's not loud. She doesn't posture or raise her voice. She doesn't need to. When things go wrong, she listens longer than anyone else. She waits. She notices details other people miss. And when she finally speaks, there's no question about who's in charge. I remember a few years back, at a base function, one of the officers told me that Dana had the kind of authority people didn't argue with. He said she ran her unit with a calm hand, never barked orders, but everyone moved when she said move. I'd seen glimpses of that at home, but mostly in small ways. She could get our daughter to open up with just a look, settle an argument with a few soft words. I used to think it was just intuition, something you were born with. Now I think it's discipline. Years of learning how to stay steady when everyone else starts to crack. After everything settled down, I caught her on the porch one night, just sitting there with a blanket over her shoulders and a cup of tea in her hands. No screens, no reports, just quiet. I sat down next to her and said I was still amazed how calmly she handled it all. She smiled and said, "Most people expect power to look loud. They don't recognize it when it's quiet." That stuck with me. She wasn't talking about herself. Not really. That's not how she thinks. But it was true. Those fake officers, the HOA president, even the neighbors who turned their heads, they all assumed we'd fold because we didn't make a scene. They thought silence meant fear. They didn't realize Dana's silence was the sound of preparation. She never gloated, never said I told you so. She just moved forward. There's something rare about that. Something steady and unshakable. And the truth is, I've never felt safer than I do when she's near. People like to talk about heroes in big, dramatic terms. They think of someone who charges in or raises a fist. But sometimes, the real power is the one who never flinches, never wavers, and never has to say a word to be heard. That's Dana. Always watching, always ready, always the calm at the center of the storm. Things have settled now, not all at once, but in pieces, like the sound of a storm finally giving way to sunlight through the trees. The new neighborhood committee formed a few weeks ago. It's made up of a mix of old faces and new ones, people who watched what happened and decided they didn't want to sit on the sidelines again. This time, meetings are open. Decisions are voted on publicly. Minutes are posted online. It's not perfect, but it's honest. Our street feels different. The tension that used to hide in the quiet moments is gone. People make eye contact again. Some even joke about the chaos, though never with much weight behind it. The kind of laughter people use when they're still not sure how close they came to something worse. Still, kids play outside again. Dogs bark at squirrels instead of strange cars. A little bit of normal has returned, and this time it feels like it belongs. Dana doesn't bring it up unless someone asks. When she does, she keeps it simple. She tells people the truth, that we were threatened, that someone tried to use fear to push us out, and that she made sure the law showed up before that fear could take root. Most people listen quietly. Some ask follow-up questions, trying to understand how she knew what to do. She never gives them the full answer. Not because she's hiding anything, but because she knows they wouldn't understand unless they'd lived it. She's back to her routines now. She still runs the security ops at the base, still comes home tired some nights, still keeps a drawer full of unread books she swears she'll get to. On weekends, she grills. It's become a new thing she enjoys. Burgers, chicken, whatever we've got in the fridge. She stands by the fire in her favorite sweatshirt with one hand on the tongs and the other on her phone, always ready, always aware. I asked her once if she thought something like that could happen again. She took a sip of her drink and said, "It always can. That's why you prepare." Then she changed the subject. Sometimes I catch her scanning the horizon when we sit out back, her eyes flicking to details most people would ignore. A car that passes too slowly, a neighbor who starts watching instead of waving. But she never seems alarmed, just alert. I've learned not to question it, not to ask what she's thinking. I trust her timing. I trust her instincts. What we went through didn't break us. It sharpened us. It reminded me that safety isn't something you inherit. It's something you defend, even when no one else is watching. And if it ever comes to that again, I won't panic. I'll do the smartest thing I can. I'll get out of Dana's way.